In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves upon cosmic shores, there exists a universal truth that every species learns: there is always something higher on the food chain. The Zephyrians learned this when the Krillax consumed their homeworld. The mighty Vorthan Empire discovered it when the Nethek swarm devoured 3 of their core systems. Even the ancient Ethereals, masters of reality manipulation, fell silent when they encountered something that made them abandon entire star clusters. But humanity? Humanity just laughed. When Captain Sarah Chen stood face to face with Warlord Kethvar, the most feared predator in known space, and heard his warning about the true apex predator that would soon arrive, her response wasn't fear or submission. It was genuine, hearty laughter that echoed through the bridge of her ship. The alien's 4 eyes widened in confusion and growing horror as he realized something that would shake the foundations of galactic hierarchy. The humans weren't afraid because they weren't prey. They were the apex predator he was warning about. And they were just getting started. The bridge of the UES Defiance hummed with quiet efficiency as Captain Sarah Chen reviewed the morning reports. 3 months into their deep space exploration mission, the crew had settled into a comfortable routine. The ship's AI, designated Aria, processed stellar cartography data while the navigation team plotted their next jump coordinates. Outside the reinforced viewports, the amber glow of Kepler 442's distant star painted the hull in warm hues. Captain Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the communications station, his voice carrying an unusual tension. "We're receiving a transmission. It's on an encrypted military frequency, but the encryption pattern, it's not human." Sarah's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. In 3 years of deep space exploration, they had encountered 17 different alien species. Some were friendly traders, others were territorial but peaceful, and a few had required careful diplomatic maneuvering to avoid conflict. None had ever transmitted on human military frequencies. "Put it on screen," she commanded, setting down her cup and straightening in the captain's chair. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a face that would haunt the nightmares of most civilized species. Warlord Kethvar of the Krillax hegemony stood nearly 3 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming like polished obsidian under the harsh lighting of his command ship. 4 compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, focused on the camera with predatory intensity. His mandibles clicked rhythmically as he spoke, the universal translator rendering his clicks and hisses into perfectly articulated English. "Human vessel," Kethvar's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Warlord Kethvar, Supreme Commander of the 47th Krillax Assault Fleet. You will prepare to be boarded for inspection and registration. Your species has been classified as Grade 7 livestock, suitable for immediate harvest and processing." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems. Sarah felt 23 pairs of eyes turned toward her, waiting for orders. She had read the intelligence reports about the Krillax. They were apex predators in the truest sense, having conquered and consumed over 60 different species in the past millennium. Their technology was advanced, their tactics brutal, and their hunger seemingly endless. Sarah stood slowly, smoothing down her uniform jacket. "I see. And, tell me, Warlord, what makes you think we're livestock?" Kethvar's mandibles spread in what the crew had learned to recognize as the Krillax equivalent of a predatory grin. "Your species shows all the markers: human. Soft flesh, inadequate natural weapons, no obvious biological defenses. Your ships are small and lightly armed. Your colonization patterns suggest a herbivorous expansion philosophy rather than predatory conquest. The Galactic Registry has already confirmed your classification." "The Galactic Registry," Sarah repeated, her tone neutral. "That's the organization run by the Ethereal Collective, correct? The ones who determine which species are predators and which are prey." "Indeed. The Ethereals have maintained galactic order for over 50,000 years. They possess wisdom beyond the comprehension of younger species such as yourself. When they classify a species as Grade 7 livestock, that classification is absolute." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Behind her, she could hear the subtle sounds of her crew preparing for combat. Weapons systems coming online, shields charging, targeting computers locking onto the massive Krillax dreadnought that loomed in the distance. But she held up a hand, a gesture that immediately halted all preparations. Before we continue this conversation, Sarah said, clasping her hands behind her back, I should probably warn you about something. The Ethereals made a rather significant error in their classification. Kethvar's compound eyes narrowed. The Ethereals do not make errors in matters of biological classification. They have studied every species in this galaxy for millennia. Their understanding of predator and prey dynamics is absolute. Is it? Sarah asked, beginning to pace slowly in front of the view screen. Tell me, Warlord, how many species have you encountered that regularly hunt creatures larger and more dangerous than themselves, not for survival, but for sport? None, Kethvar replied immediately. Such behavior would be evolutionarily disadvantageous. Predators hunt prey that offers the best energy return for the lowest risk. How many species have you encountered that wage war not just for resources or territory, but for abstract concepts like freedom or ideology? Kethvar hesitated. Few. Such conflicts are wasteful. How many species have you met that will pursue a single enemy across vast distances for years, spending enormous resources simply because that enemy harmed their pack? Sarah's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. That is not typical predator behavior, Kethvar admitted. Sarah stopped pacing and faced the screen directly. How many species have you encountered that keep other apex predators as companions in their homes? That bred wolves into dogs, that tamed great cats, that made friends with creatures that could easily kill them? The bridge of the Krillax dreadnought had grown quiet. Sarah could see other figures moving in the background, officers and warriors all focused on the human captain who spoke with disturbing calm about disturbing concepts. You speak of impossible things, Kethvar said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Do I? Sarah smiled, and there was something in that expression that made the seasoned warlord take an involuntary step backward. Let me tell you about human history, Warlord. We evolved on a death world. A planet where the weather could kill us, where massive predators hunted us, where diseases and natural disasters claimed millions. Do you know what we did? Kethvar didn't answer. We thrived. We didn't just survive, we conquered our entire planet. We drove the megafauna to extinction. We tamed the weather. We eliminated diseases that had plagued us for millennia. We split the atom and touched the stars. And, when we ran out of things to conquer on our world, we started conquering space itself. She gestured to the view screen, where distant stars twinkled like scattered diamonds. Every single star system humanity has colonized was claimed not because it was safe and comfortable, but because it was there. We terraform hostile worlds because we can. We build cities in the hearts of gas giants, on the surfaces of frozen moons, in the coronas of stars themselves. We don't look for easy prey, Warlord. We look for the next impossible challenge. Kethvar's mandibles had stopped clicking. His compound eyes remained fixed on Sarah, but she could see uncertainty creeping into his posture. The Ethereals, Sarah continued, made their classification based on our appearance and our expansion patterns. They saw that we avoid unnecessary conflict, that we prefer diplomacy to war, that we establish trade relationships rather than tributary systems. They interpreted this as weakness. As herbivorous behavior. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They didn't realize that we avoid conflict not because we're weak, but because we're strong enough to be merciful. They didn't understand that we prefer diplomacy because we've seen what happens when our kind truly goes to war. They missed the most important detail about humanity. What detail? Kethvar's voice was barely audible. Sarah's smile widened, and now every human on the bridge was smiling too. It was a distinctly unsettling sight. We're not livestock, Warlord. We're not even typical predators. We're persistence hunters. Endurance predators. We don't need to be faster or stronger than our prey. We just need to never, ever give up. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Kethvar found his voice. You're trying to intimidate me with words. The Krillax have conquered civilizations across the galaxy. We have devoured species far more advanced than yours. Your ships are tiny. Your numbers are few. You cannot possibly threaten the might of the hegemony. Sarah nodded, understanding. You're absolutely right. In a straight fight, ship to ship, you would destroy us easily. Your technology is superior. Your numbers are overwhelming. By every conventional measure, you should crush us like insects. She turned to her tactical officer. Commander Park, please show our guest the readings from our long-range sensors. The tactical display updated, showing a three-dimensional representation of local space. Red dots marked the positions of the Krillax fleet, over 200 vessels of various sizes, all bristling with weapons. A single blue dot marked the position of the human ship, impossibly small in comparison. As you can see, Sarah said, we are hopelessly outgunned and outnumbered. Cathvar's confidence began to return. Then, you understand the futility of resistance. Prepare for boarding. Your crew will be processed efficiently. I promise you minimal suffering if you comply. Actually, Sarah said, her tone remaining maddeningly calm, I was hoping you could help me with something. You see, we've been monitoring your communications since you entered this system. Your encryption is quite good, but human computer systems are rather persistent when it comes to pattern analysis. The warlord's compound eyes widened. Impossible. Krillax encryption has never been broken by a grade 7 species. Nevertheless, Sarah continued, we've been listening to your fleet chatter for the past 6 hours. And, we couldn't help but notice something interesting. You seem to be running from something. Your ships are damaged. Your crew is afraid. And, you keep mentioning something called the true apex predator. The change in Cathvar's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. His exoskeleton darkened to a deep purple-black, a physiological response that indicated extreme stress in his species. His mandibles began clicking rapidly, and several of his officers moved closer to the screen. You know nothing of what you speak, he hissed. The true apex predator is beyond your comprehension. It is death incarnate. It is the end of all things. Really? Sarah's eyebrows rose in apparent fascination. Tell me more. What exactly is this true apex predator? And, more importantly, why are the mighty Krillax running from it? Cathvar's breathing had become labored, his massive frame trembling with what appeared to be genuine terror. 3 months ago, we received reports of ships disappearing in the Outer Rim territories. Not destroyed, disappeared. No debris, no distress signals, no survivors. Entire fleets would simply vanish without a trace. He paused, gathering himself. At first, we assumed it was the work of pirates or rogue AI systems. The hegemony dispatched the 23rd Assault Fleet to investigate. They found the missing ships. Found them where? Drifting in space, completely intact. No life signs, no power, no trace of the crews. The ships were clean. Spotless. As if every living thing had simply evaporated. But that wasn't the worst part. Sarah waited patiently. The worst part was the message. On every single ship, carved into the hull in letters 10 meters tall, was the same phrase, "You are not the apex predator. We are coming." A chill ran down Sarah's spine, but she maintained her composed expression. And this true apex predator, it's been hunting your fleets? Hunting? Cathvar's laugh was bitter and hollow. No, human. Hunting implies pursuit, effort, challenge. This thing doesn't hunt us. It simply takes us. Entire star systems have gone dark. The 15th Fleet, 300 ships and 50,000 warriors sent their last transmission 4 days ago. Do you know what it said? Sarah shook her head. They're here. They're everywhere. How did they know? Then, silence. The human captain processed this information carefully. The Krillax hegemony was one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy. For something to reduce them to this state of panicked flight. And now you're here, she said slowly, harvesting grade 7 species to feed your refugees. We need supplies. Resources. The outer colonies have been evacuated. Billions of Krillax refugees are fleeing toward the galactic core. We must feed them, fuel our ships, maintain our fleet. When this true apex predator is finally defeated, we will need to rebuild. Sarah nodded sympathetically. That makes perfect sense. And, you're certain this true apex predator is following you? Our long-range sensors detected massive gravitational anomalies in the system we fled 3 days ago. Whatever technology they use, it's beyond our understanding. They will be here soon. How soon? Kethvar's mandibles clicked nervously. Perhaps days. Maybe hours. We must complete our harvesting operations and flee before they arrive. You cannot comprehend the danger, human. This entity makes the Krillax look like scavengers. It is the ultimate predator, the final evolution of hunting behavior. Nothing can stand against it. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she smiled again, and this time the smile was genuinely warm. Warlord Kethvar, I appreciate you sharing this information with me. I truly do. But, I'm afraid there's something else I need to tell you. What? Sarah's smile became broader, and, behind her, every human on the bridge was grinning. The true apex predator you're so afraid of? The one that's been systematically dismantling your fleets and terrifying your entire civilization? She paused for dramatic effect. That's us. The silence that followed was absolute. Kethvar's compound eyes went completely dark, a physiological impossibility that indicated his nervous system was struggling to process what he had just heard. Impossible, he whispered. The UES Defiance isn't an exploration vessel, Warlord. It's a hunter-killer ship, part of the most advanced deep strike fleet humanity has ever assembled. We've been tracking your forces for 3 months, systematically eliminating your infrastructure, liberating your prey species, and sending a very clear message. Sarah gestured to her communications officer, who nodded and began transmitting. Throughout the Krillax fleet, ship after ship began reporting the same impossible reading. Human vessels were decloaking all around them. Hundreds of ships that had been invisible suddenly blazed to life on sensors, their weapons already locked onto Krillax targets. You see, Sarah continued conversationally, humans have this particular talent. We're very good at learning our enemies' tactics, their technology, their psychology. We studied every species you've conquered, every battle you've won, every strategy you've employed. And, then, we got better. The tactical display now showed the true situation. The Krillax fleet was completely surrounded. For every red dot representing a Krillax ship, there were now 3 blue dots representing human vessels. The ships you found? Sarah said. The clean hulls with carved messages? We call that psychological warfare. The disappearing fleets? Asymmetric engagement doctrine. The gravitational anomalies your sensors detect? Alcubierre drive signatures. All human technology, Warlord. We've been the apex predator you were running from all along. Kethvar's massive frame was shaking now, his evolutionary fear response completely overwhelming his rational mind. But, the ethereals, the classification was wrong, Sarah finished. The ethereals made their determination based on incomplete data. They saw that we avoid conflict and assumed we were weak. They didn't realize that we avoid conflict because we're strong enough to end it permanently when we choose to engage. She leaned back in her captain's chair, her expression becoming almost conversational. You know what the really funny part is, Warlord? We didn't come here to hunt you specifically. We came to stop you from harvesting grade 7 species. We were actually hoping we could resolve this diplomatically. Then, you'll let us go? Hope crept into Kethvar's voice. Sarah's expression hardened. I didn't say that. The bridge of the human ship seemed to grow colder. You've enslaved 67 different species. You've committed genocide on a scale that makes our worst historical monsters look like amateurs. You've carved a trail of suffering across the galaxy that spans 1,000 years. She stood again, her voice gaining strength and authority. The human species has a saying, never again. It means that when we encounter true evil, when we find those who prey upon the innocent and weak, we don't negotiate. We don't compromise. We don't show mercy. Sarah's eyes met Kethvar's through the screen, and the alien warlord saw something there that made his blood run cold. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was the calm, patient determination of a species that had looked into the abyss of its own capacity for violence and chosen to aim that violence only at those who truly deserved it. "We eliminate the threat," she said simply. The last thing Warlord Kethvar heard before the transmission cut out was the sound of human laughter. Not cruel or mocking, but genuinely amused. The laughter of a species that had just played the greatest practical joke in galactic history, convincing the most feared predators in known space that they were actually the prey. And, in the depths of space, surrounded by ships carrying the most persistent, patient, and utterly implacable hunters the galaxy had ever produced, the Krillax finally understood what it meant to be at the bottom of the food chain. Admiral Elena Vesquez stood in the holographic command center of the UES Retribution, watching as tactical displays updated in real time across dozens of star systems. The massive ship, one of humanity's newest Titan-class dreadnoughts, served as the mobile headquarters for Operation Apex Dawn, the largest military campaign in human history. Admiral, called Commander Singh from the intelligence station, were receiving surrender transmissions from 17 different Krillax fleets. Total vessel count exceeds 4,000 ships. Elena nodded, her expression remaining calm despite the magnitude of what they had accomplished. In just 6 hours, the combined human fleets had systematically cornered every major Krillax military force in 3 sectors. The aliens who had terrorized the galaxy for over a millennium were now trapped, surrounded, and utterly demoralized. "Any word from Captain Chen's group?" she asked. The Defiance reports successful capture of Warlord Kethvar and his command staff. "No casualties on our side. The Krillax didn't even return fire once they realized the scope of our operation." Elena allowed herself a small smile. Sarah Chen had volunteered for the most dangerous part of the mission, making first contact with the Krillax leadership and revealing humanity's true nature. It was a gamble that could have resulted in immediate warfare, but Elena had trusted her captain's psychological profile of the enemy. Fear, she had calculated, would be more effective than force. "Signal all fleet commanders," Elena ordered. "Begin Phase 2. Throughout the galaxy, human fleets began the next stage of their carefully orchestrated plan. But, instead of destroying the trapped Krillax vessels, they began transmitting on open frequencies that every spacefaring species in the galaxy monitored. The message was simple, broadcast in over 300 languages. "This is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Space Command. To all civilizations within range of this transmission, the Krillax hegemony has surrendered unconditionally to human forces. All enslaved species are hereby liberated. Any vessel flying Krillax colors that attempts to continue harvesting operations will be destroyed without warning." This is not a negotiation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across dozens of star systems, species that had lived in terror of Krillax raids for generations began celebrating. Formerly enslaved populations rose up against their captors. Trade routes that had been abandoned due to pirate activity suddenly blazed with renewed commerce. But it was the response from the galactic powers that truly mattered. Admiral, Commander Singh called out, were receiving priority transmissions from the Ethereal Collective. Also the Vorthan Empire, the Nexus Federation, and practically every major civilization in known space. "Put the Ethereals through first," Elena ordered. The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of an ethereal high counselor, a being of pure energy contained within an ornate crystalline matrix. The Ethereals had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years, using their advanced technology and psychic abilities to maintain order among the younger species. They were ancient, powerful, and absolutely convinced of their own superiority. "Admiral Vasquez," the Ethereal's voice resonated directly in Elena's mind, bypassing her ears entirely. "Your species has committed an act of unprecedented aggression against the established galactic order. The Krillax hegemony operates under official sanction from the collective. Their harvesting operations are entirely legal under galactic law." Elena had been expecting this. "High Counselor, with respect, humanity is not a signatory to galactic law. We never agreed to your authority or your classifications. From our perspective, we just stopped a genocide in progress. Your perspective is irrelevant. The galaxy operates according to natural law, not the emotions of primitive species. The Krillax are apex predators. They harvest grade 7 livestock. This is the natural order. Natural order, Elena repeated, her tone neutral. Tell me, High Counselor, how many grade 7 species have developed faster than light travel independently? That is not relevant to biological classification. How many grade 7 species have developed quantum computing? Artificial intelligence? Controlled fusion? Nanotechnology? The ethereal's energy pattern fluctuated, indicating irritation. Technological development does not alter fundamental biological classification. A prey species remains prey regardless of its tools. Elena gestured to Commander Singh, who activated a series of holographic displays showing human technological achievements. Dyson swarms harvesting stellar energy. Artificial pocket dimensions used for storage and manufacturing. Ships that could phase through solid matter. Weapons that could manipulate fundamental forces. These are the achievements of a grade 7 livestock species? Elena asked. Your technology is impressive for such a young race, the ethereal conceded, but technology alone does not determine predator status. The Krillax possess biological advantages that what? Elena interrupted. That make them superior hunters? Let me show you something interesting. The display shifted to show tactical recordings from the recent engagements. Krillax fleets, despite their superior numbers and firepower, had surrendered without firing a shot once they realized the scope of human capabilities. Your apex predators, Elena said, fell apart the moment they encountered actual resistance. They've spent so long hunting defenseless prey that they've forgotten how to fight real predators. The ethereal's form pulsed with increasing agitation. You do not understand the complexity of galactic ecosystem management. The collective has maintained balance for millennia. Species are classified according to their proper role in the cosmic order. Without this structure, chaos would consume everything. Chaos, Elena mused. You know what I find interesting about that word choice? It suggests you're not actually maintaining natural order at all. You're maintaining artificial control. The distinction is irrelevant. We have the power to enforce our will. You will release the Krillax immediately and submit to proper classification, or face the consequences. Elena had been waiting for this moment. Everything humanity had planned for the past 5 years came down to the next few minutes. High Counselor, before you make any threats, I think you should be aware of something. We've been monitoring your communications for quite some time. The ethereal's energy pattern froze. Impossible. Our quantum encrypted channels are beyond the capabilities of primitive species. Are they? Elena smiled. You see, one of the advantages of being consistently underestimated is that nobody bothers to guard their secrets properly. We've been intercepting and decrypting ethereal transmissions for over 3 years. She nodded to Singh, who brought up a new series of displays. This time, they showed detailed schematics of ethereal technology, fleet positions, and, most damning of all, internal communications discussing the livestock management of various species. These are fascinating documents, Elena continued. They show that the ethereal collective doesn't actually determine species classifications based on biological factors at all. You classify species based on their potential threat to your dominance. Any species that develops too quickly or shows too much independence gets classified as livestock and fed to the Krillax. The implications hung in the air like a weapon waiting to fall. The ethereal's form flickered and wavered as the ancient being processed this revelation. Furthermore, Elena continued, we've discovered that you've been artificially suppressing technological development in dozens of species, ensuring they remain dependent on your guidance. The famous wisdom of the ethereals is actually a protection racket on a galactic scale. These accusations are absurd, the ethereal protested, but its voice lacked conviction. Are they? Then, you won't mind if we share these communications with every spacefaring species in the galaxy? The silence that followed was telling. For the first time in 50,000 years, an ethereal High Counselor found itself without words. Elena leaned forward slightly. Here's what's going to happen, High Counselor. Humanity is formally withdrawing from all ethereal classifications and agreements we never signed in the first place. We're establishing direct diplomatic relations with every species that wants them. And we're offering protection to any species that feels threatened by the current galactic order. You cannot simply ignore established authority. Can't we? Elena's smile was sharp. You classified us as grade 7 livestock. According to your own laws, livestock has no rights and no legal standing. So by your own logic, nothing we do can be illegal. The ethereal's form began to shift toward a deep red coloration, indicating extreme anger. You play word games while threatening the stability of civilization itself. No, Elena corrected, we're offering civilization an alternative. A chance to develop and grow without artificial restrictions. A chance to reach their potential without fear of being fed to the Krillax when they become inconvenient. And, if we refuse to accept this alternative? Elena's expression hardened. Then, you'll discover why the Krillax were so terrified of us. You've spent 50,000 years believing you're the apex predators of this galaxy. You've never encountered a species that evolved to hunt other apex predators. The threat hung between them, unspoken but clearly understood. The ethereal collective had maintained their dominance through superior technology and psychic abilities, but they had never faced a species that specialized in analyzing, adapting to, and ultimately surpassing any threat they encountered. This conversation is not over, the ethereal finally said. No, Elena agreed, it's not. But, the next time we speak, it will be as equals, not as rulers and livestock. Good day, High Counselor. The transmission ended, leaving Elena alone with her command staff. The bridge was silent for a moment as everyone processed what had just occurred. Admiral, Commander Singh said quietly, we've just declared independence from a 50,000-year-old galactic empire. Are we sure we're ready for the consequences? Elena looked out at the stars visible through the bridge's massive windows. Somewhere out there, hundreds of species were learning for the first time that they might have alternatives to the roles assigned to them by their ethereal masters. The galaxy was about to change in ways that nobody could fully predict. Commander, do you know what the most dangerous moment in any ecosystem is? She asked. No, ma'am. It's when the apex predator realizes it's no longer at the top of the food chain. That's when it becomes truly desperate, truly dangerous. Elena turned back to face her staff. The ethereals have ruled this galaxy through fear and manipulation. They've convinced entire civilizations that their system is the only way to maintain order. But, now they're faced with something they've never encountered before. What's that, Admiral? Competition. Elena activated the ship's general communications system, addressing not just her own crew but every human ship in the fleet. All vessels, this is Admiral Vasquez. As of this moment, we are no longer operating under galactic law or ethereal authority. We are writing our own rules. We are establishing our own relationships. We are proving that there is another way. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. But, make no mistake, this is only the beginning. We've revealed ourselves to the galaxy, and not everyone is going to be happy about it. The ethereals will try to maintain their control. Other powers will test our resolve. Some species will welcome our intervention, others will see us as invaders. The bridge crew listened intently as their admiral outlined the magnitude of what they had undertaken. The Krillax terrorized this galaxy for 1,000 years because nobody was willing or able to stop them. The ethereals maintained artificial control for 50 times longer because nobody questioned their authority. We've changed that. We've shown that their system isn't inevitable, isn't natural, and isn't unchallengeable. Elena's voice gained strength and conviction. From this day forward, humanity stands as proof that evolution doesn't stop with the apex predator. There's always something more adaptive, more persistent, more determined to survive and thrive. We are that something. She looked around the bridge at her officers, men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment. We didn't ask for this responsibility. But, we're the only species in this galaxy that evolved to hunt other hunters. We're the only ones who learned to turn every disadvantage into an advantage, every defeat into a lesson, every enemy into a teacher. The communications system carried her words to every corner of human space, and, from there, to listening posts throughout the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humanity before this day were learning what it meant to face a true apex predator. The Krillax thought they were the ultimate hunters, Elena concluded. The Ethereals believed they were the final arbiters of galactic order. They were both wrong. There is no final evolution, no ultimate predator, no permanent authority. There is only adaptation, growth, and the endless pursuit of something better. She closed the channel and returned her attention to the tactical displays. The galaxy was already responding to humanity's revelation. Trade routes were shifting. Alliances were forming and dissolving. Some species were declaring independence from ethereal oversight, while others were doubling down on their loyalty to the ancient order. Admiral, called the communications officer, were receiving thousands of messages from across the galaxy. Some are expressions of gratitude from liberated species. Others are threats from various powers. And a few are very interesting. Interesting how? Some species are asking if humanity is willing to accept refugees. They want to know if our space is open to those fleeing ethereal control. Elena considered this. Humanity had always been a species of immigrants and refugees, people seeking better lives and new opportunities. The idea of extending that welcome to alien species felt natural, even inevitable. Draft a response, she ordered. Any species fleeing oppression is welcome in human space, provided they agree to respect the rights and freedoms of others. We're not looking to build an empire, we're looking to build a community. As the hours passed, the full scope of what humanity had accomplished became clear. The Krillax hegemony, the most feared military force in the galaxy, had been neutralized without firing a shot. The ethereal collective's authority had been publicly challenged and their secrets exposed. Dozens of species were beginning to assert their independence for the first time in millennia. But Elena knew this was just the opening move in a much larger game. The galaxy's existing powers wouldn't give up their control easily. There would be attempts to destroy humanity before they could fully establish themselves. There would be propaganda campaigns to discredit their message. There would be wars. Commander Singh, she called, begin preparations for Phase 3. Yes, ma'am. What are your orders? Elena smiled, but there was steel in her expression. It's time to show the galaxy what humans do when someone tries to put us back in a cage. We're going to remind them why apex predators should never, ever underestimate the species that learn to hunt them. In the depths of space, the human fleet began to move. Not toward conquest or domination, but toward something the galaxy had never seen before, a truly free and open civilization where species were judged not by ancient classifications or arbitrary rules, but by their actions and their potential. The age of ethereal dominance was ending. The age of human-led liberation was just beginning. And, throughout the galaxy, in the deepest corners of space where the oppressed and forgotten had hidden for millennia, a new word began to spread. A word that carried with it the promise of hope, the threat of revolution, and the certainty of change. That word was freedom. 3 weeks after humanity's revelation to the galaxy, Captain Marcus Webb stood on the observation deck of the UES Prometheus, watching the most extraordinary sight in human history unfold before him. The Kepler-186 system, once empty except for a few mining outposts, now hosted the largest gathering of diverse alien species ever recorded. Ships of every conceivable design floated in carefully organized formations around the artificial space station humans had constructed in just 10 days. There were sleek Altarian cruisers with their distinctive crystal hulls. Massive Gorvani colony ships that looked more like floating cities. Delicate Serani vessels that seemed to be made of living light. Even former Krillax ships, now painted in new colors and crewed by liberated slave species. Captain, called Lieutenant Chen from the communications station, the Zephyrian delegation is ready for transport. They're requesting permission to bring their entire cultural archive. Marcus nodded. Grant it. The whole point of this conference is to let species share their true heritage without ethereal censorship. He turned to his first officer. Status report on the other delegations? Commander Park consulted her datapad. We have representatives from 237 different species. 43 are attending in person, the rest via quantum entanglement communication. The engineering teams report the translation matrix is functioning at 96% efficiency. Marcus whistled softly. When Admiral Vasquez had proposed holding an open galactic conference, most of the command staff had thought it was impossibly ambitious. The logistics alone of accommodating so many different species, with their varying atmospheric requirements, gravitational needs, and biological incompatibilities, should have been insurmountable. But humanity had learned something important about galactic politics. Most species were desperate for alternatives to ethereal control. They just needed someone to take the first step. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen called again, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth." "It's Admiral Vasquez." "Put her through." The main view screen activated, showing Admiral Vasquez in her office aboard the Retribution. Behind her, Marcus could see holographic displays showing fleet positions throughout human space. The past 3 weeks had been busy ones. "Captain Webb," Vasquez began without preamble, "I need a status report on the conference. How are the delegations responding to our proposals?" Marcus gestured toward the observation windows, where the massive fleet of diverse ships continued to arrive. "Better than we hoped, Admiral. The Freedom Charter has been signed by over 160 species so far. The non-aggression accords have been accepted by virtually everyone except the hardliners still loyal to the Ethereals. And the economic cooperation framework? That's where things get really interesting," Marcus replied, unable to keep the excitement out of his voice. "The trading opportunities are beyond anything we imagined. The Altarians have quantum computing technology that's centuries ahead of ours. The Gorvani have perfected biological terraforming. The Serani can manipulate gravity in ways our physicists are still trying to understand." Vasquez leaned forward. "And, in exchange? They want human innovation techniques. Our approach to problem solving, our educational methods, our collaborative research protocols." Apparently, most species have been so focused on staying within their assigned roles that they've forgotten how to truly innovate. This was perhaps the most surprising discovery of the conference. Species after species had revealed that their technological development had been subtly guided by the Ethereals for millennia. They had been given just enough advancement to fulfill their designated functions, but never enough to question the system or develop beyond their assigned limitations. "Captain," Vasquez said, "I need you to understand something. Intelligence reports indicate the Ethereals are not taking our intervention well. We've intercepted communications suggesting they're preparing what they call a correction event." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of correction event?" "The kind that typically results in entire star systems being quarantined or worse. They've done it before. Any species that grows too quickly or challenges their authority simply disappears from galactic records. We think they're planning to do the same to humanity and anyone openly supporting us." The implications were staggering. 50,000 years of ethereal rule hadn't been maintained through wisdom and guidance alone. It had been enforced through the systematic elimination of any potential challenges to their authority. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. "Unknown. Our deep space sensors have detected massive energy signatures moving toward our space, but the Ethereals are using technology we don't fully understand yet. Could be days, could be weeks." Marcus looked out at the assembled fleet of ships representing the hopes of hundreds of species. "Admiral, these people came here because they believe we can offer them something better than servitude. If the Ethereals attack while the conference is in session..." "I know," Vasquez said grimly. "It would send a message to the entire galaxy that challenging ethereal authority is futile." "That's exactly what they want." "Orders, ma'am?" Vasquez was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing options. "Continue the conference as planned. But begin discreet preparations for evacuation if necessary." "And, Captain?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Make sure our guests understand what they're risking by associating with us. They have a right to know what they're choosing." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of responsibility. In the next few hours, he would have to inform 237 different species that their hopes for freedom might be about to collide with 50,000 years of established power. He made his way to the main conference chamber, a massive spherical room that had been designed to accommodate representatives from dozens of different environmental niches. Some delegates floated in containment fields filled with methane. Others existed as pure energy, contained within crystalline matrices. A few were so large they attended via hologram, while others were microscopic hive minds that spoke through synthetic avatars. The sight never failed to amaze Marcus. This was what the galaxy actually looked like when species were free to be themselves, rather than forced into artificial categories. Delegates, Marcus announced, his voice carried through the translation matrix to every representative, I need to share some important information with you. The chamber fell silent. Marcus looked around at the assembled beings, creatures that represented the dreams and aspirations of trillions of individuals across hundreds of worlds. We have received intelligence that the Ethereal Collective is preparing to take direct action against this conference and all participating species. They view your presence here as a threat to galactic stability. The reaction was immediate and varied. Some delegates began agitated discussions in their native languages. Others simply went still, processing the implications. A few began preparing to leave immediately. I want to be absolutely clear, Marcus continued, that anyone who wishes to depart can do so without any judgment from humanity. We understand the risks you're taking. We understand the potential consequences. But, I also want you to know that we have no intention of abandoning this cause or any species brave enough to stand with us. Delegate Vorthak of the Zephyrian Republic was the first to respond. His crystalline form pulsed with determined light as he spoke. Captain Webb, my species lived in fear of the Krillax for over 300 years. We watched as our neighbors were harvested, knowing we could be next. When humanity stopped the Krillax fleets, you gave us something we had almost forgotten existed, hope. The delegate paused, his form shifting to deeper, more resolute colors. If the ethereals wish to punish us for daring to hope for something better, then, they will discover that hope is far more dangerous than they realized. Similar statements came from across the chamber. The Gorvani declared their commitment to the great growth that humanity has begun. The Surani spoke of illumination breaking the darkness of enforced ignorance. Even former Krillax subjects, species that had suffered unimaginably under the old system, stood ready to face whatever consequences their freedom might bring. But, it was the statement from Representative Kala of the Nexus Collective that truly captured the mood of the conference. For 50,000 years, she said, her multitonal voice carrying harmonics that the translation system rendered as profound sadness mixed with fierce determination, my people have been told that we are a support species. We exist to maintain the technology of our betters. We are not meant to innovate, to explore, to dream of something more than our assigned function. She gestured to the diverse assembly around her. But, look at us now. Look at what we accomplish when we are free to choose our own paths. The ethereals call this chaos, but I call it life. True, messy, beautiful life. Her form solidified, taking on the appearance of polished metal that reflected the lights of 100 different species. If they come to take this away from us, they will find that we have learned something from our human friends. We have learned to fight not just for survival, but for the right to be more than what others tell us we are. The declaration was met with what could only be described as galactic applause, a cacophony of sounds, lights, and energy patterns that represented agreement and solidarity across dozens of different communication methods. Marcus felt a surge of pride and terror in equal measure. These beings were willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom, but they were relying on humanity to help them survive what was coming. Delegates, he said, if you're determined to see this through, then we need to discuss practical preparations. The ethereals have technologies and capabilities that we're still learning about. But they also have weaknesses that we can exploit. The next several hours were spent in intensive strategic planning. Species that had never been allowed to share military knowledge began comparing notes on ethereal tactics and technologies. Scientists who had been forced to work within artificial limitations began collaborating on defensive technologies. What emerged was a picture of the ethereal collective that was both more and less frightening than anyone had imagined. They possessed incredible technological capabilities, including the ability to manipulate matter and energy on quantum levels. But they had grown complacent after 50,000 years of unchallenged rule. They had never faced coordinated resistance from multiple species working together. More importantly, they had never faced humanity's particular brand of adaptive warfare. The key, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, humanity's leading expert on ethereal technology, is that they've always relied on overwhelming technological superiority. They show up with impossible weapons and impossible defenses, and their enemies surrender without fighting. She activated a holographic display showing analysis of captured ethereal equipment. But here's what they don't expect: a species that treats impossible technology as a puzzle to be solved rather than a divine mandate to be accepted. The revelation sparked intense interest from the assembled delegates. Species after species began sharing stories of technologies they had been forbidden to research, questions they had been discouraged from asking, innovations they had been told were beyond their capabilities. "They've been limiting all of you," Dr. Kim continued, "keeping you focused on narrow specializations to prevent exactly this kind of collaborative breakthrough. But when we combine human adaptability with Altarian quantum processing, Gorvani biological engineering, and Serani gravitational manipulation." She trailed off as the implications became clear. The assembled species, working together without artificial restrictions, possessed the potential to not just resist ethereal control, but to surpass it entirely. "We're not just fighting for freedom," Marcus realized aloud. "We're fighting for the right to become what we were always capable of being." The conference took on new urgency as delegates began working around the clock to develop joint defensive strategies. Former enemies found themselves collaborating on projects that would have been unthinkable under the old system. Species that had been kept separate by ethereal design discovered compatibility and synergy they never knew existed. But even as hope grew, the threat remained real and immediate. Long-range sensors continued to detect massive energy signatures approaching human space. Whatever the ethereals were bringing, it would test every alliance and innovation the conference had produced. "Captain," Lieutenant Chen called from the bridge, "we're receiving a transmission on an ethereal priority frequency. It's addressed to all conference participants. Put it on the main display." The holographic projector activated, revealing the imposing figure of an ethereal supreme counselor, a being whose energy matrix was so complex and ancient that looking at it directly caused most organic beings to feel overwhelmed by its sheer presence. To all species participating in the illegal assembly in the Kepler 186 system, the ethereal's voice resonated with absolute authority: "You have been deceived by a primitive species that does not understand the complexities of galactic governance. The human entities have filled your minds with concepts of freedom and independence that can only lead to chaos and destruction." The Supreme Counselor's form pulsed with what could only be described as disappointed parental authority. "We have governed this galaxy for 50,000 years. We have maintained peace, order, and prosperity. Each species has been assigned a role that maximizes their contribution to galactic civilization while minimizing conflict and waste." Around the conference chamber, delegates listened with expressions ranging from anger to fear to determination. These were beings who had lived their entire lives under this authority, and, hearing it stated so boldly, stripped away any illusions about the ethereal's true nature. "The humans offer you chaos disguised as choice. They promise you freedom that can only result in war, suffering, and the collapse of everything we have built together. Return to your designated roles, and this incident will be forgiven. Continue on this path of rebellion, and you will face the consequences of challenging the natural order." The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in absolute silence. For a moment, the weight of 50,000 years of authority pressed down on everyone present. These beings had been conditioned from birth to obey ethereal commands, to accept their assigned roles, to never question the system that governed their lives. Then, Delegate Vorthak began to laugh. It started as a crystalline chiming sound, but it grew and multiplied as other delegates joined in. The Gorvani added their harmonic resonances. The Serani contributed pulses of light that somehow conveyed humor. Even the microscopic hive minds generated patterns that the translation matrix interpreted as laughter. Within minutes, the entire chamber was filled with the sound of hundreds of species laughing at 50,000 years of galactic authority. "Did you hear that?" Vorthak asked when the laughter finally died down. "They called us an illegal assembly. They said we've been deceived by humans. They actually believe that the only reason we might want freedom is because we're too stupid to understand why we shouldn't want it." Representative Kala's metallic form shifted to patterns that indicated profound amusement. 50,000 years of rule, and they still don't understand the species they've been governing. They truly believe that we are incapable of making our own choices. Well, Marcus said, his own smile matching those visible on faces throughout the chamber, I suppose they're about to learn otherwise. The delegates turned their attention back to their collaborative work with renewed energy. If the ethereals wanted to treat them like rebellious children, they would show the ancient beings what children could accomplish when they stopped playing by their parents' rules. Outside the conference chamber, human ships continued their defensive preparations. But, inside, representatives of hundreds of species worked together on something that had never existed in galactic history, a truly free alliance of equals, united not by assigned roles or ancient authority, but by shared hopes for something better. The ethereals were coming to restore order to their galaxy. They were about to discover that order, like apex predator status, was not permanent. And that the universe always had room for something new. The ethereal warfleet emerged from hyperspace like the wrath of ancient gods made manifest. 12 massive vessels, each one larger than a human city, their crystalline hulls pulsing with energies that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Around them, smaller escort ships swarmed in perfect formations, their movements so precisely coordinated they seemed to be operated by a single mind. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the impossible sight through the main viewscreen. The human fleet, along with ships from 43 allied species, was arranged in defensive positions around the Kepler 186 station. By any reasonable measure, they were hopelessly outgunned. Admiral, called Commander Singh, the lead ethereal vessel is hailing us. They're demanding immediate surrender and the dissolution of what they call the illegal confederation. Elena nodded. This moment had been inevitable from the second humanity had revealed itself to the galaxy. The ethereals couldn't allow open rebellion to succeed, not when their entire system of control depended on the belief that resistance was impossible. Put them through, she ordered. The viewscreen shifted to show an ethereal being unlike any they had encountered before. Where previous ethereals had appeared as complex energy patterns within crystalline containers, this entity seemed to exist as pure force given barely contained form. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to bend around its words. I am High Commander Zarthul of the Ethereal Correction Fleet, the being announced, its voice causing several junior officers to stagger under the psychic weight of absolute authority. You will immediately cease all hostile actions, disperse your illegal gathering, and submit to proper galactic order. Elena stepped forward, meeting the ethereal's overwhelming presence with calm determination. High Commander, I am Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Space Command. We appreciate your concern for galactic stability, but we must respectfully decline your demand. The energy patterns surrounding Zarthul intensified, turning a deep crimson that hurt to look at directly. Admiral Vasquez, you appear to be suffering from the delusion that you have a choice in this matter. We have governed this galaxy for 50,000 years. We have maintained peace, order, and prosperity through careful management of species development. Your rebellion threatens to undo millennia of progress. Progress, Elena repeated thoughtfully. An interesting word choice. Tell me, High Commander, do you consider the Krillax harvesting operations to be progress? The Krillax serve their function as apex predators, maintaining population control among Grade 7 livestock species. This prevents resource conflicts and ensures optimal galactic stability. Elena felt her jaw clench at the casual dismissal of genocide as administrative policy. And species that develop beyond their assigned parameters? What happens to them? Zarthul's form flickered with what might have been impatience. Aberrant development is corrected. Species that cannot adapt to their proper roles are relocated to more suitable environments. The euphemism was chilling in its matter-of-factness. Entire civilizations had been relocated whenever they showed signs of growing beyond their assigned limitations. No wonder the galaxy had remained static for so long. High Commander, Elena said, I'm going to make you an offer. We have no desire for conflict with the ethereal collective. We simply want the right to exist and develop according to our own choices, along with any other species that shares that desire. Surely there's room in a galaxy this vast for multiple approaches to civilization? The ethereal's laughter was a sound that made several windows crack under its harmonic resonance. Admiral, you demonstrate the exact type of primitive thinking that necessitates proper guidance. You believe that choice and freedom are inherently good, without understanding the chaos they inevitably produce. Zarthol's form expanded, growing more imposing as it spoke. We have watched countless species destroy themselves through uncontrolled development. We have seen civilizations tear apart reality itself in their ignorant pursuit of knowledge they were not ready to possess. We have witnessed the birth of cosmic horrors that required the combined might of our entire collective to contain or destroy. The revelation sent a chill through Elena's spine. She had always wondered why the galaxy seemed relatively peaceful despite its vast size and diverse populations. If the ethereals had been actively preventing dangerous developments. That is why, Zarthol continued, species must be guided. Controlled. Limited to their safe parameters. It is not cruelty, Admiral. It is necessity. Elena found herself in the uncomfortable position of understanding her enemy's point of view, even as she rejected it utterly. High Commander, I don't dispute that uncontrolled development can be dangerous. But, surely forced stagnation is worse? You've created a galaxy of species that can never reach their full potential, never grow beyond arbitrary limitations, never become more than what you allow them to be. And, in doing so, we have prevented the deaths of trillions and the destruction of entire sectors of space, Zarthol replied. Your species shows all the classic signs of dangerous development. Rapid technological advancement, aggressive expansion, refusal to accept assigned limitations. If we allowed you to continue unchecked, you would inevitably discover or create something that would threaten the stability of reality itself. Elena paused, considering the ethereal's words. There was a terrible logic to their position, a cold calculation that weighed the freedom of species against the safety of the universe. But, there was also something that the ancient beings seemed to be missing. High Commander, she said slowly, what if you're wrong? Wrong? What if controlled development is actually more dangerous than free development? What if keeping species as perpetual children prevents them from developing the wisdom and responsibility that comes with true growth? Elena gestured toward the diverse fleet surrounding the station. Look at what we've accomplished in just 3 weeks of free cooperation. Species that were kept separate have found synergies you never allowed them to discover. Technologies that were suppressed have combined to create solutions to problems you declared unsolvable. She paused, letting the implications sink in. What if your corrections have actually been preventing the galaxy from developing the tools it needs to handle real threats? Zarthol's form flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. Impossible. Our models account for all significant variables. Do they? Elena smiled grimly. Your models predicted that humanity would accept grade 7 classification. They predicted that liberated species would collapse into chaos without guidance. They predicted that the Krillax would be sufficient to maintain order through fear. How many other things have your models gotten wrong? The silence that followed was telling. For the first time in their conversation, the ethereal seemed to be genuinely considering what Elena had said rather than simply dismissing it. Nevertheless, Zarthol finally said, the risk is too great. Even if your confederation succeeds temporarily, the eventual consequences of uncontrolled development are statistically certain. We cannot allow it. Elena had expected this response. Despite their conversation, the ethereals were too invested in their system to abandon it based on philosophical arguments. They would have to be convinced through demonstration. Very well, High Commander. But, before you begin your correction, I have one final request. Allow me to show you something that might change your perspective. Elena nodded to Commander Singh, who activated a series of holographic displays around the bridge. The displays showed detailed breakdowns of human technological development, but not in the way the ethereals would expect. These are records of humanity's most dangerous technological achievements, Elena explained. Nuclear weapons. Biological warfare. Artificial intelligence. Nanotechnology. Genetic engineering. Every single one of these developments had the potential to destroy our species or worse. Zarthol's attention focused intently on the displays. And, yet you developed them anyway, proving our point about the dangers of uncontrolled advancement. We developed them, Elena corrected, and, then, we learned to control them. Not through external limitation, but through internal growth. Through understanding consequences. Through developing the wisdom to know when and how to use dangerous tools. The displays shifted to show humanity's actual history with these technologies. The careful international frameworks developed for nuclear weapons control. The ethical guidelines created for biological research. The safety protocols built into AI systems. The regulatory structures that governed genetic engineering. We didn't stop developing dangerous technologies, Elena continued. We learned to develop them responsibly. We made mistakes, yes. We had close calls. But each mistake taught us to be more careful, more thoughtful, more responsible. Zarthol was silent, processing this information. Elena pressed her advantage. High Commander, what if the galaxy's species could learn the same lessons? What if, instead of preventing them from growing, you helped them grow wisely? What if your vast experience could guide development rather than suppress it? You suggest cooperation? The concept seemed almost alien to the ethereal. I suggest evolution, Elena replied. Your collective has maintained order for 50,000 years. That's an incredible achievement. But order isn't the same as progress. Stability isn't the same as growth. What if it's time for the next phase of galactic civilization? For a long moment, Elena thought she had actually reached the ancient being. Zarthol's energy patterns had shifted to colors that suggested deep contemplation. Around the bridge, her officers held their breath, wondering if they were witnessing a historic moment of peaceful resolution. Then, alarms began blaring throughout the human fleet. Admiral! Commander Singh called out, his voice tight with alarm. We're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the ethereal fleet. They're charging weapons that are off our scale of measurement. Elena's heart sank. Despite their conversation, despite the philosophical arguments and logical reasoning, the ethereals had made their choice. They would not allow the rebellion to continue, regardless of its potential benefits. High Commander, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Zarthol's form had shifted back to its original imposing crimson coloration. Admiral Vasquez, your arguments are intriguing. Perhaps, under different circumstances, we might have found a way to accommodate your desires for growth and development. The ethereal's voice carried genuine regret, which somehow made what came next even more terrible. But the risk is too great. The potential for catastrophic uncontrolled development outweighs any possible benefits. The correction will proceed as planned. Elena nodded grimly. She had hoped for peaceful resolution, but she had prepared for war. All ships, battle stations. Implement Protocol Omega. Throughout the Allied fleet, ships began moving into positions that seemed almost suicidal, spreading out to minimize coordinated defense, exposing their most vulnerable aspects to enemy fire. To any conventional military observer, it looked like the fleet was preparing to be slaughtered. But humanity had learned something important about fighting superior enemies. Sometimes you had to change the rules of engagement entirely. High Commander, Elena said, her voice carrying across the comm channel to both fleets, before you begin your correction, you should know something about human military doctrine. What? Zarthol asked, though his attention was clearly focused on coordinating the attack. We don't fight to win, Elena said. We fight to learn. The first ethereal weapons fired, and reality itself screamed in protest. Beams of coherent spacetime distortion lanced out from the correction fleet, weapons that didn't just destroy matter but erased it from existence entirely. By all rights, they should have ended the battle in seconds. Instead, they struck carefully positioned gravitic mirrors that the Allied fleet had deployed throughout the system. Mirrors that had been constructed using combined human engineering, Serani gravitational manipulation, and Alterian quantum processing. The impossible beams bounced. For the first time in 50,000 years, ethereal weapons were turned back on their creators. The lead escort ship vanished in a flash of its own weapon fire, erased as completely as if it had never existed. Impossible. Zarthol's voice cracked with shock. Our weapons cannot be reflected. The mathematics forbid it. Your mathematics, Elena corrected. Built on assumptions about what species are capable of when they work together. built on models that never accounted for true cooperation between equals. The second wave of ethereal attacks met a different fate. Energy webs deployed by former Krillax vessels, now enhanced with Gorvani biological components, absorbed the incoming fire and fed it into massive capacitor arrays. The stolen energy powered defensive fields that had been deemed impossible by ethereal science. You see, High Commander, Elena continued, her voice carrying over the sounds of battle, you were right about one thing. Uncontrolled development is dangerous. But controlled development is stagnation. What you never considered was guided development. Development with purpose, wisdom, and cooperation. The third wave of attacks never reached their targets at all. A network of phase-shifting minds, invisible until the moment they activated, created pocket dimensions that swallowed entire energy beams and redirected them harmlessly into empty space. But Elena knew that humanity's defenses, impressive as they were, couldn't hold forever. The ethereals had weapons and capabilities that even their combined knowledge couldn't fully counter. The goal wasn't to win a conventional victory. The goal was to teach the galaxy's oldest species something new. All ships, she broadcast on an open frequency that would be heard throughout the system, initiate the Revelation Protocol. What happened next would be remembered as the moment that changed galactic civilization forever. Every ship in the Allied fleet simultaneously broadcast every piece of data they had collected about ethereal technology, tactics, and capabilities. Not just to each other, but to monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. In a single instant, 50,000 years of carefully guarded ethereal secrets became public knowledge. Species across hundreds of star systems suddenly had access to information that had been forbidden to them since the dawn of galactic civilization. What have you done? Zarthel's voice carried a note of horror that Elena had never heard from an ethereal before. What humanity does best, Elena replied. We shared information. We collaborated. We made sure that regardless of what happens here, the galaxy will never be the same. The battle continued, but its character had fundamentally changed. This was no longer about stopping a rebellion. This was about preventing the complete transformation of galactic civilization. And, throughout the galaxy, in listening posts and research stations and hidden laboratories, millions of beings began studying the newly revealed information and asking themselves the most dangerous question in the universe: what if we could do better? The age of ethereal control was ending not with conquest, but with the simple, revolutionary act of sharing knowledge freely. The true apex predators weren't those who hoarded power, but those who gave it away. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 186, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Ambassador Sarah Chen, formerly captain of the UES Defiance, stood in the observation lounge of the New Geneva station, watching the most extraordinary sight in galactic history. The massive space habitat, built in the neutral zone between human space and the former ethereal territories, hosted diplomatic missions from over 800 different species. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see ships that would have been impossible just a year ago. Vessels that combined ethereal energy manipulation with human engineering principles. Craft that used Alterian quantum processors to power Gorvani biological systems. Even former Krillax dreadnoughts, now converted into mobile research laboratories and staffed by liberated species working alongside their former oppressors. Ambassador, called Dr. Kim from the communication console, were receiving the final reports from the reconciliation committees. The results are, well, they're unprecedented. Sarah turned from the window, still marveling at how much had changed since that day when she first laughed at Warlord Kethvar's warning about the true apex predator. The irony was still amusing, the Krillax had been right, just not in the way they expected. Show me, she said. The holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Different regions were color-coded to represent various political and social developments. The scale of transformation was breathtaking. The ethereal collective has formally dissolved, Dr. Kim reported. The individual ethereal beings have established smaller, autonomous collectives focused on research and exploration rather than governance. Surprisingly, most of them seemed genuinely relieved to be free of administrative responsibilities. Sarah nodded. That had been one of the most unexpected developments. Once the immediate crisis had passed, many ethereals had privately admitted that they had grown weary of their role as galactic managers. 50,000 years of making decisions for other species had left them intellectually stagnant and emotionally exhausted. What about the former Grade 7 species? That's where it gets really interesting, Dr. Kim said, his excitement evident. Without artificial limitations, technological development has accelerated beyond our most optimistic projections. The Zephyrians have developed quantum crystallography that can store the entire knowledge base of a civilization in a structure smaller than a grain of sand. The Threnodidae have created biological computers that can process emotional and intuitive data alongside logical calculations. The display shifted to show specific examples. Sarah saw images of cities that seemed to grow organically from living crystal, spacecraft that look more like works of art than machines, and research facilities where beings of pure energy worked alongside carbon-based lifeforms to explore questions that neither could have addressed alone. And the Krillax? The transformation there has been perhaps the most dramatic, Dr. Kim replied. Once they were freed from their role as enforcers, their natural curiosity reasserted itself. They become some of the galaxy's most dedicated researchers, particularly in the field of ethical philosophy. They seem determined to understand how their species became so focused on predation. Sarah smiled at that. Warlord Kethvar himself had become one of the most vocal advocates for the new cooperative approach to galactic civilization. His insights into the psychology of dominant species had proven invaluable in helping other apex predators adapt to a more collaborative existence. But, the most significant development, Dr. Kim continued, is the emergence of what the research teams are calling synergistic consciousness. Synergistic consciousness? When species collaborate without artificial restrictions, their combined cognitive capabilities seem to exceed the sum of their parts. Human intuition enhanced by Alterian processing speed, combined with ethereal energy manipulation and Gorvani biological integration, creates problem-solving capabilities that no single species could achieve. The implications were staggering. For 50,000 years, the galaxy had been artificially limited to the capabilities of its individual species. Now, for the first time, the combined intelligence of hundreds of civilizations was being brought to bear on the universe's greatest challenges. Any problems? Sarah asked. Experience had taught her to be wary of solutions that seemed too perfect. Several, Dr. Kim admitted. About 30% of species are having difficulty adapting to increased responsibility and freedom. Some are paralyzed by choice after millennia of following assigned roles. Others are experiencing what psychologists are calling development anxiety, fear that they'll make mistakes if they grow too quickly. Sarah had expected this. Freedom was a skill that had to be learned, not just granted. What are we doing about it? The guidance collectives are helping. These are voluntary associations of species that provide support and advice to others going through rapid development. Interestingly, many former ethereal beings have joined these groups. They're finding that teaching and mentoring suits them much better than ruling. The door to the observation lounge opened, admitting Admiral Vasquez. The Admiral looked tired but satisfied, the expression of someone who had accomplished something truly historic. Ambassador, Vasquez greeted her. How are the latest reports looking? Better than we hoped, Sarah replied. How did the meeting with the remaining opposition go? Vasquez's expression grew more serious. About as expected. The Hegemon Alliance, the Dominion Worlds, and the Purity movements are still convinced that the new order will lead to chaos and destruction. They're forming what they call a Stability Preservation Front to resist further changes. Sarah wasn't surprised. Even with the overwhelming evidence of positive transformation, some species and factions remained convinced that the old order was safer. Fear of change was a powerful force, especially when backed by millions of years of evolutionary caution. How many systems are we talking about? Approximately 800 star systems across 47 species, Vasquez replied. Not enough to threaten the new order, but significant enough to cause problems if they become actively hostile. Sarah considered this. The great challenge of the new galactic civilization wasn't military opposition, but collaborative technologies developed by free species had made traditional warfare increasingly obsolete. The challenge was philosophical. How do you convince beings to embrace freedom when they've been conditioned to fear it? Any ideas? Actually, yes, Vasquez said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It comes from an unexpected source, the reformed Krillax. They've proposed something they call the demonstration protocol. Which is, instead of trying to convince the opposition through arguments or pressure, we simply demonstrate the benefits of freedom. We establish open research stations on the borders of their territories. We invite them to observe our collaborative projects. We share our discoveries freely, without demanding anything in return. Sarah raised an eyebrow. And if they try to take advantage of our openness? Then, they learn firsthand why sharing information makes you stronger, not weaker, Vasquez replied. The Krillax pointed out something interesting. Every time they tried to conquer a species that freely shared knowledge, they ended up being changed more than their targets. Information has its own form of momentum. It was a profoundly human approach to the problem, Sarah realized. Instead of forcing change, they would make change so obviously beneficial that resistance would naturally erode over time. There's something else, Vasquez continued. The Deep Space Monitoring Network has detected something that might interest you. Sarah waited. Signals from beyond the galactic rim. Organized, artificial signals suggesting advanced civilizations in nearby galaxies. The combined processing power of our cooperative networks has been able to decode some of them. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. And they're asking for help. It seems that other galaxies have their own versions of controlling apex civilizations. Word of our transformation has somehow reached them, and they want to know if what we accomplished here can be replicated elsewhere. The implications were mind-bending. If the pattern of artificial limitation and control existed in other galaxies, then the revolution they had started might have consequences far beyond their own spiral arm. Admiral, Sarah said slowly, are you suggesting that we might need to take our message beyond this galaxy? I'm suggesting that we might not have a choice, Vasquez replied. If other galaxies are requesting assistance in overthrowing their own versions of the ethereal system, and if those systems are as oppressive as ours was, then we have a moral obligation to help. Sarah turned back to the window, looking out at the ships representing hundreds of free species working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old order. The sight filled her with pride, but also with a growing sense of responsibility. You realize what you're suggesting, she said. Intergalactic intervention. Exporting revolution across cosmic distances. The challenges would be enormous. So were the challenges of transforming our own galaxy, Vasquez pointed out. 6 months ago, the idea of ethereals working alongside former livestock species would have seemed impossible. Now it's routine. Sarah nodded, understanding the parallel. Humanity had always been a species that pushed boundaries, that refused to accept limitations as permanent. It made sense that they wouldn't stop at galactic boundaries. What would we need? New technologies, for starters. Our current ships can't cross intergalactic distances in any reasonable timeframe. We'd need to develop something beyond our current understanding of physics. Vasquez gestured toward the busy traffic of ships outside the station. But, look what we've accomplished when species collaborate freely. The ethereal sold energy manipulation techniques, combined with human engineering and Alterian quantum processing. I think intergalactic travel might be more achievable than we realize. Sarah considered this. The new cooperative technologies had already produced breakthroughs that individual species had thought impossible. Intergalactic travel might just be the next impossible thing to become routine. And the political challenges? Those might be easier than the technical ones, Vasquez said. Every species that's experienced freedom seems to want to share it. The idea of helping liberate other galaxies has generated enormous enthusiasm among the collaborative networks. Sarah could believe it. One of the most remarkable aspects of the new galactic civilization was how eagerly former victims wanted to help others in similar situations. The cycle of oppression was being replaced by a cycle of liberation. There's something else to consider, Sarah said. What if we succeed too well? What if we create an intergalactic civilization based on cooperation and freedom? What happens when we run out of galaxies to liberate? Vasquez smiled. Then, we'll have achieved something that no species in cosmic history has ever accomplished, a truly free universe. And I suspect that when that happens, we'll discover new challenges and opportunities that we can't even imagine yet. Sarah turned back to the window one more time, watching the impossible sight of a galaxy transformed by the simple idea that every species deserved the right to reach its full potential. Ships from hundreds of worlds worked together on projects that pushed the boundaries of science, art, and philosophy. "You know what the strangest part of all this is?" she said. "What?" "We never intended to become apex predators. We just wanted to stop being prey. But, somehow, in the process of freeing ourselves and others, we discovered that the ultimate predator isn't the one that dominates others, it's the one that helps others become predators themselves." Vasquez nodded. "The Krillax called us the true apex predator because they thought we were better at hunting and killing. They were wrong. We're the true apex predator because we're better at learning, growing, and helping others do the same." Sarah smiled, remembering her conversation with Warlord Kethvar all those months ago. The alien had warned her about something coming that would challenge their understanding of power and dominance. He had been absolutely right. Humanity had arrived, and they had challenged everything. But, instead of replacing the old order with a new form of dominance, they had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had made dominance itself obsolete. The true apex predator, it turned out, was the species that figured out how to make everyone else an apex predator too. Through the window of New Geneva Station, representatives of 800 species worked together on problems that would shape the future of not just their galaxy, but, potentially, the entire universe. Former enemies collaborated on projects that would have been unimaginable under the old system. Ancient civilizations learned new ways of thinking from species they had once dismissed as primitive. And, at the center of it all, guiding and facilitating but never controlling, humanity continued to do what it had always done best: adapt, learn, and share that knowledge with anyone willing to listen. The galaxy had learned to laugh at the old warnings about apex predators. Not because such things didn't exist, but because they had discovered something better. They had learned to become apex predators of freedom itself. And, in the vast darkness of intergalactic space, other civilizations were beginning to receive signals carrying a simple message: you are not alone. You do not have to accept limitations imposed by others. There is another way. The revolution that began with Captain Sarah Chan's laughter was spreading beyond the stars themselves. And, the universe would never be the same.